In this lesson, we're going to be exploring more complex objects and arrays, and when you have a mix of objects and arrays together, how you can output that content onto the page. So starting out by creating an HTML file. So I just got my basic HTML structure here. I'm going to add in one page element that I'm going to be selecting and outputting the content into. So just going to give it a name of output. And then just below that, I'm going to add in the script tags. So just do it within the HTML file. And within the script file, we're going to be outputting the content. So we'll select that output area first that we want to output the content to. And I'm going to use the document and query selector method in order to select the element with a class of output. So that will select it into the output object and prepare us to be able to output content onto the page. I've also opened up the file within my browser on the right hand side. So that's the path to where this example1 HTML file is located so that we can minimize this and we can output the results within the web browser on the right hand side. I'm also going to go ahead and open up the developer tools and go over to the console so we can see the output of the JavaScript into the console. So once we're set up, next we can create the object. And so the object is going to be a mix of arrays as well as objects contained within them. And it's going to be a fairly complex one. So let's start out by creating and defining our object. So using the curly brackets, that will create an object. And first off, we'll create a more simple object, and then we'll make it more complex. We'll create another one that's more complex. So the first one is going to contain just the people. And this is going to be an array of people. And all of the items within people, these are going to be objects. So we've got our first object, and we want to have some consistency within the object structure. So starting out by first name, and this is going to be a string value. So it is important when you are constructing these objects that you do have consistency in the object structure. So I'm also going to just do last name. And so this will create an object with another object that's got an array associated to the property name, and that's where we've got the content. So that's where we've got the array structure, and if we want to loop and output that content, then we've got to get to the array part of the object. So for now, we're going to output into the console my object, and we'll just take a quick look and we'll see what it looks like within the console. So we refresh the page, we've got people, and within the people, we've got, so this is an object, and this is associated to an array, and then the array is within that object. So that means that we can comma separate out the items within the array, and we can add more items into this array. So we can have another one with the same structure, so first name and last name. So let's update these so that they are different. And just create a name there. And now we'll refresh, and we've got an array, and there's two people within the array. And because the object structure within each one of the items within the array, this is consistent, it's going to make it really easy for us to select and output that content. So let's first try and select that content, and then we'll output it into that output area that we created on the page. So the first thing that we want to do when we select that, we want to indicate the object name. So that's the object name. And then the object contained within the my object is going to be people, and now this is where our array is going to be located. You can also see that when you type into the console the object and you get the array. So the array has the index values of 0, 1, and then however number of items you have within the array, and it's going to have a length. So this is an array with multiple objects within that array. So let's use the for each method to loop through each one of the items within the array, and we'll assign a variable name of person to that, and then we'll console log out person as we loop through the array that's contained within the object. So let me just move this up and center it, and we'll refresh, and that way we're getting each one of the people or the person that's in there. So now we can take the output, update the inner HTML of output, and we're going to just add to it, so the plus and equal sign, and we're going to be taking whatever we've got the result for people and first name, or person first name, and I'm going to use the backticks, so the template literals, in order to output the content. So that's that one with the backtick, which is the key to the left of the one key on most keyboards. And then we don't need to break out of the string. We can contain it all within the one string, line of string. And then we'll also add in a line break. Or what we can do is we can separate these out as separate divs as well. So we can add in the HTML tagging. So now let's refresh, and there we've got the people being listed. So we did want to cover off even more complex objects in this lesson as well. And we're going to contain everything within the my object. So this will have people, but it's also going to have another object, and that object is also going to have an array, and this will be cars. So just give it a name of cars. And within the cars, we're going to do the same structure as the people initially. So we've got different types of cars and different car manufacturers. So when we output the object into the console, let's scroll up there, we can see that we've got the cars array, and right now the cars array is empty, so we don't have any items in there, but we do have items within the people array, so we've got a couple items in there. So within the cars array, let's create some objects, and we'll refresh. So within the array now, the cars array, we have one item, and this is an empty object. So once you add in that rounded bracket, you're creating another object. So I know I said we're going to make this fairly complex, so let's go ahead and we're going to make it more complex. So if we wanted to add in a car manufacturer, and this is where having the structure of your object is really important, because it's going to save you a lot of trouble when you're trying to output the content onto the page. So this is just one example of one way to do that, and I'm actually making it more complex on purpose so that we can actually see how we can get the various object property names out of this this JavaScript object. So we're giving it the object with inside is going to be Ford, and this is going to have a property name of Ford, and that's going to actually then contain an array of items, and that array is also going to contain an object in there, and it's going to contain multiple objects in there. So it's going to have a year, and this will just indicate whatever the year of the vehicle is, so 1980, and then also the make of the vehicle. So let's use the string value and create a Mustang. So that's our first item under the Ford object, and we're using the property name of Ford. So that's making it more complex to make the selection. And I'm just going to add in a couple. I know we could do quite a few, but it's going to all work the same way. And I'll make another one, Taurus. Or actually, I'm going to do the F-150. So that's the pickup truck for Fords. So let's refresh, and we'll take a look at, and we'll see how complex our object is getting. So within cars, this is an array. Within the array, we've got one item in the array, and that's going to be an object, and that object is going to have a property name, and that's going to contain a couple items within that property name array. So when we're outputting the JavaScript, we have to work our way through and traverse through to the array in order to loop through it and iterate through it to output the contents. And that's why it's really important that you structure it in an easy format, and it's going to be a similar format in order to make the selection. So now that we've got the one item here within this object is the Ford, we're going to actually add a second item in this, and we're going to give it a different property name to make it even more complex. So this one's going to be a Chevrolet, and the structure for the vehicles is going to be the same. So we'll give it a year for the vehicle, and then a make for the vehicle. and we'll create one more here. And then this can be a Corvette. So let's refresh one more time. And now we see within the cars, so within the main my object, we've got cars and people. So people was relatively straightforward because the people was an array and we could loop through the items in the array and output it. The cars is going to be more complex because the cars is referring to an array, but this array has separate items, and each one of these items have different property names. So this presents a unique challenge for us in order to get the content out. So it is, of course, possible to do that, and one of the resources that I sometimes will use is that I'll take the JavaScript object details and I'll go over to a website like JSON lint, and there you can just make sure that your JSON is valid JavaScript object. So it looks like I've got an extra comma there, so try that again, and now it looks like it's a valid JavaScript object. And it also makes it more readable as well. So sometimes when you are creating these, you might miss a comma or add an extra comma or the bracket. So that's why it's always a good idea to go through the lint and just make sure that you're properly structured. And it also, again, it is more readable. So let's move on to this challenge where we want to output the contents of the vehicles. So typically, if you wanted to output it that way, you might want to consider a different way to select the items, but it is still possible. So let's work through that. So similar to what we did with my people, where we're outputting the contents of the people, and I'm going to first output into the console before I try to write to the screen. So that we can see the breakdown of each one of the items here that we're outputting. So let's output, and instead of people, we're outputting the contents of cars. So far it's fairly straightforward, and this can be each one of those elements. So just give it a name of L, and then within the console, we'll output L, and we'll see what that looks like. So this is our entire object here. And we're able to output each one of the items that are contained within the object. So as we go through the cars array, we've got 2 items, but they have different property names, and the arrays are nested within those property names. So what we want to do is we want to actually output the Ford, we want to output the Chevrolet, and then select the arrays that are matching those. So it does present a unique problem because in order to traverse to Ford, you need to know what the object property name is. So there is a way to get the object property name. So if you use the object keyword and we get the keys, so this will return back all of the object keys in an array format. So let's see what that looks like. So when we refresh, we've got Ford and we've got Chevrolet. So that gives us the property names that are going to contain the arrays that we want to ultimately output, but we only want to get the first item in the array. So we want to convert this essentially to a string. So these are all consistent where we're using the first item. These are arrays with one item in there, and we can select it by its index value of 0. So that will return it back within the string format. In the string format, we can use the bracket notation in order to select the items. So using this format, we can get the key out. So sometimes it's easier to create a variable out of it. So the key, I'll just give it a name of KY for key. And that's just going to take that object key name and turn it into a string value, because it's the string value that's going to allow us to make the selection from the object to get to the array. So let's save that. And this is just going to be outputting the key. So just KY, and it's outputting the string value for key. So that doesn't change. That still gives us the Ford and Chevrolet. So now we want to go into the objects, the my cars objects, but we want to use the key value to return back. So that's where bracket notation comes in, because that allows us to dynamically control the property value. So whereas we're using the dot notation, this is only allowing us to use a set variable name. The bracket notation has more flexibility. So it's going to let us use the string value as the property name for the object. So let's see how that works. So right now we're returning back cars and we're using the keys, but we're still getting nothing being returned back. And that's because if we remember, we're looking for that object. So that's being returned back there within the cars object. So we're actually getting that within L. And let's refresh that one more time. So we're getting it within the Ford and within the array. And we can also do it this way, where we're selecting the my cars, but we're getting the first item within the cars. So that's going to be returning back that Ford array. So we want to navigate into that first item, and this is where we can use the key value. So that KY value, and then this in turn should return back the array. So we've got the array there, and this is, once we can get to the array, that means that we can loop through the array object. So it's a matter of navigating down and being able to properly select the array before you try to access the content contained within the array. So we can also do this with a loop, and I'm actually going to also include the index value here. So when you use the for each, you can use the index value, and that will return back that index value. So what that will do is that will allow us to get both of the arrays using the key value, and we're getting that dynamically from the object name. So now we've got the array that we're ready to use, and I'm going to create a variable so that we don't have to have this whole long path to get to the array object. So just as we did with the key, it's just shortening the array. It's not going to change the output, but it's going to allow us to have a simpler syntax in order to loop through the contents of that array. So now that we've got an array, we can use for each and output each one of the cars, and just going to output each car into the console. So refresh it, and once again use the console to make sure that you're getting the content properly. And the other nice thing here is that we do have the key name, so we can even add to the output. So if we want to add to the output the manufacturer name by the key, we can do that. So that will just output whatever the value of KY is. So that's that dynamic value that we're getting. So Ford, Chevrolet is being output there. And we can also output each value within the car object that's contained within that array as we're out looping through there. So we've got a make and we've got a year. So that's contained within car. And as long as that structure is consistent, then we should be able to output both of these into the HTML page. So let's see what that looks like. So there's all of our content coming from the more complex structure we have for the object. So again, as long as you're keeping the structure consistent, now you can add to this complex object. So if I want to have a Honda, and I want it to have a Honda Civic or a Honda Accord, we can refresh and add those items into the complex object and output them into the page. And again, the most important part is that you've got consistency within your object, and that you have a way to navigate and select out the array contents so that you could use them and loop through them and output them onto the page.